All right, today we're gonna talk about how good was peak Tezuka. I think this should be a fun topic. So the quick answer is really good, duh, and we end the video here. But I like to talk, so here we go. Here's a quote from September 2006 Occult Fan written by Addy. Triad Wars 4 is currently in the quarterfinals, playing for a place in the semifinals. We have the first matchup, Tezuka vs. Cookie. Tezuka is a relatively new player to TTA, but he's certainly made his mark, and I look forward to seeing how well he progresses against Cookie, a legend and veteran in the TTA community, also the winner of SE Yuffie. Definitely an interesting matchup of old school versus new school. Later, we have March 2007 with Kazi's 3 Up, 3 Down. This is talking about three players that are really hot right now. The third guy in the hot seat is Tezuka. Tez has only been around TTA about a year, and he has accomplished what not many new people have been able to do: make a name for yourself as a new guy surrounded by people who have been around for years. If you asked me 6 months ago who Tezuka was, I would tell you he was the new guy in Avalanche. Ask me now, and I'll tell you that he has made a strong quarterfinals finish in his first SE tournament, a semifinals finish in Triad Wars 4, and is now not only a member of Avalanche, but one of the core members of the clan. This guy is going to be great. So here's Tezuka's very first tournament. He goes 5-1. He makes a semifinals. You'll see his path is beating Cypher, Dalamar, Gafgarian, Crimson, and Cookie before losing to, I always say Sasuke, but it's definitely pronounced Sasuke, isn't it? Or closer to that. Anyway, that's Seto. That's Seto he lost to. And specifically, the Gafgarian and Cookie wins are really impressive. The very next tournament, TTAC 4, those two would make the finals against each other, and Cookie would become a two-time champion and probably become the, you know, I've argued about this era a lot, but clearly one of the top four players of all time at that point, and quite possibly just top two. And Tezuka beats both right before that happens. It's a really, really impressive first tournament. So then I wanted to look at, let's compare all the first tournaments and see who had the best first tournament runs. And in fact, if we exclude the first few tournaments ever, just because someone has to go 6-0 in the first tournament ever, and there were a lot of people that had been playing a long time, on previous websites, and so their first tournament ever is a bit misleading because it wasn't really their first tournament ever. But if we cut out the first section of tournaments, specifically cutting out up to Firebrand winning his, then we get clearly a selection of people where I think this really was these players' first tournaments, maybe with a couple exceptions, but there's a good chance it was. We have 6 different players who went 3-1 in their first tournament. We have Yevon, who would later make a finals. We have Dorf, the FRM, and Clock. Dorf, the only one to really play at length, but all of them have really respectable win rates in tournaments. All of them, I think, all but one maybe over 50%. And Nightwish, who obviously went on to become a top 10 all-time player. Probably I have him 7th. Anyway, then we have Sevenude, Kazdon, Bryce, and Karmazin. Again, we have some people who didn't stick around that long. Bryce played 2 tournaments and 4-1'd both. Karmazin played 2 tournaments and won one and 4-1'd the other. I always thought Kazdon was really good. I remember when I was starting out, he was one of the people who just beat me most consistently, into me being quite good. And Sevenude, also a pretty short run. But we only have these 3 5-1s, and I think they're all pretty notable. XCV stopped playing, and Sephiroth stopped playing really quickly, so Tezuka is the only one of this group to keep going. But XCV, finaled their first tournament. Sephiroth, I thought was fantastic. One of the best 2-minute open players I've seen. Great Sephiroth was better. Great Sephiroth was the premier 2-minute open player of that era. But, Sephiroth was very much in conversation for second best in that format. Very good player. So, Tezuka, you could argue, you'd have to look at the opponents that XCV and Sephiroth played, and I think they had very difficult brackets as well. But you could argue this is, again, excluding those first few tournaments, the best start to a player's career ever. It's one of the maybe you look at Karmazin or whoever and you compare opponents there and you think those are comparable to the 5-1s. But, it might be the best start to a career ever, and at worst it's top 3 or 5. Yeah. Really phenomenal start. And again, also keep in mind who these players lost to. Sephiroth lost to Kazik, XCV lost to Bren, Tezuka lost to Seto. As good as Kazik and Bren are, Seto is much better. Um, the only one I think really comparable on that front is Karmazin lost to Sujiro, but Seto's better than. Yeah. So, okay. My point is, if you look at these and you look at who they beat and you look at who they lost to, yeah, Tezuka kind of stands alone as maybe the best start to a career ever. Within a year of that result, he had been part of Avalanche's sole major title. I don't have perfect records of the past, but I'm pretty sure Avalanche has won one major title in Avalanche's history, Clan Wars 5, and he was part of this team within a year of joining the site. And if you look at the other members of the team, Seto, Jadat, Koops, Steve 3, Sage, and Kefka, he's probably the second or third best player on that team. I mean, Koops had a finals near then. Steve, very consistently good. Sage and Kefka, solid. But it's probably between him and Jadat for second best on that team. I don't have a ton of records of past stuff. It tends to be intermittent. It's entirely what the Wayback Archive happened to save and what it didn't. But the records I have says he went 3 wins, no losses, no ties. That's all I have records of. That seems pretty good to me. He also went 4-1 in Zell, beating a 2 times finalist in the first round. The very first 2 times finalist to not have a title. You know, we talk about Kazik a lot. Famously, he was, made these 2 finals. Midas now has made a lot of finals. I used to talk about Chickeny a lot. But Ulti is the original greatest to never win, and Tezuka beats her. And then in TTAC 5, he beats Great Sephiroth, admittedly a very early Great Sephiroth, but beats Great Sephiroth and Turds before losing to the eventual champion in the semifinals. So this is a pretty crazy run. There were a lot of really good players at the time. So was it the best run of this era? You have D having a really good run. You have Deli and Seto taking over the world. You have Cookie winning his second tournament. And there's a bunch of other people who had nice runs there as well. Bryce has her 2-4-1s. So where you think that stacks up in that pantheon is kind of difficult to calibrate, but it's a really good run, especially for a first year of playing. So was that Tezuka's peak? Maybe. There are sort of 2 contenders for his peak. He has his first year where he is on fire. Then he kind of drops off a bit, goes somewhat inactive for a few years, comes back to get a 4-1 in semifinals in Triad Wars 7, I want to say. Disappears for a bit again, comes back, plays a few tournaments, gets one more deep run, disappears for a bit, ends up having a few icon finishes right before the site's initial close, and has now come back. And I want to look at specifically, because he's not really very active right now. He hasn't played, I think, the last couple major events. But I want to look at this run, especially early to middle of the return so far, where I think he may have surpassed his previous peak. And I think you'll agree with me, because it's hard to argue with. So from 2015 to 2023, which is a huge span of time, but it also, because of the breakup of the site, is not that many tournaments, and also because there weren't that many tournaments in the mid-2010s and none in the late 2010s. He earned 6 consecutive icons, which tied the all-time record. There is now a new holder of that record, but when Tezuka did it, it did tie the all-time record for icons, and I believe it's still tied second. In open tournaments in the return, specifically hand tournaments, so not including the randoms, he's earned an icon 75% of the time, which is nuts. You can go look at my leaderboard and see no one who's played very long earns icon 75% of the time. He has beaten 6 different champions: Turds, Akiyama, Vid, Chickeny, Scythe, and Acela, and 3 finalists: Piggyman, Yevon, and Blizzard. He reached his first finals. That 5-1 was a semifinals because tournaments were longer in those days. His 4-1s were semifinals. And here he finally got his first finals. In fact, he got 2 of them. And most importantly of all, he won one of those finals to become a champion. Which is why it's very hard to argue that this is not the peak of Tezuka. But, you could argue harder in the past. We've certainly talked a lot about that. But what I really want to focus on here is in the return, there have been 12 open hand tournaments. I should have said hand here. And 11 of them have been won by a very specific quartet: Delial, Turds, Was Up, and Seto. All of them now have at least 5 championships. This is the most decorated crew along with Yojimbo in the site's history. And then there is one person who has broken through that stranglehold. And what's really interesting is if you look at who Tezuka has lost to, he has only lost to members of that quartet and one other player, Midas, who deserves tons of credit here. But there's been this really dominant quartet. And if you look for who's the one player who has kind of broken through this, it's Tezuka, who has also been really dominant against anyone not of those four, plus Midas. And Tezuka is the one player to have won a title other than those in a primarily open hand tournament. And he won TTAC, going on undefeated in both open and closed. And of the TTACs we have records of, he's the only player to just never lose, right? In TTAC, you're going to lose games in the closed or in the random or in the open. And he is our only winner to be undefeated in all formats. Oops, I did not mean to go to the next slide. So just really incredible run from Tezuka, and just breaking up of this monopoly on titles, the only person to have successfully done so. So one thing I wanted to look at was kind of where his run went. And you can see here in the results column how far he went in different tournaments. You can see who he lost to in the lost to column. And the real thing I'm bringing is accuracy. So accuracy is the percentage of moves that kind of correctly get the correct result for the position. So if the position was tied and you play a move that is losing against perfect play, and there was a move that tied against perfect play, you only get credit if you played the tie. You don't get credit if you played the loss. If the position is winning, you only get credit if you play a winning move against perfect play. And so this is the percentage of moves played, not counting move 9, because move 9 there is nothing to do, and not counting moves where there are no options, where all moves are the same result. So if on move 1 every move was a tie, I don't give you credit for playing a tie because there was no chance for you to play something else. But you usually get credited for 3 to 4 moves in a game. If you were losing no matter what, also you don't get credit for not playing something worse than a loss, because there is nothing worse than a loss. So if you're like losing from the start, maybe none of your moves will get any credit either way, as correct or incorrect. But you can see his accuracy percentage over time. And then rank is among players that played in at least 2 rounds, including one without elemental, because I can't judge elemental. I don't have the records. I didn't keep them. I kept them a little bit, but I didn't keep them enough to recreate. And also I don't have a program that can run that, and oh my god, would it be hard to figure out every plausible move by hand. This would take me ages for every game. Not gonna happen. So this is his rank in each of these tournaments in accuracy among players who played a substantial amount of games in the tournament. And you can see that in 5 different tournaments, he was a top 3 player by this metric. Different tournaments have different accuracy and different rule sets that leads to different accuracy. But that's 5 different times when he was playing at as best accuracy can tell. Now, accuracy doesn't adjust for opposition, but I actually think he had very difficult opposition in most of these tournaments. I don't think, you can talk about this in a lot of things. If I'm asking you math questions and we're just counting how many you get correct, if I'm asking you 2 plus 2 and 3 plus 3, you're going to get 100%. If I'm asking you, some complexer algebra, maybe you're not going to get 100%. If we start doing something hard, whatever, calculus, whatever, something like you're not familiar with, you're probably going to be like 0%. Your accuracy is going to depend on the difficulty of problems your opponents pose you. So accuracy on its own is probably not the best metric, because it doesn't adjust for how difficult the problems you're being posed, and I'm going to try to build out metrics that handle that better. But it's pretty good, and over the long term, it should, where you don't control your opponents, things should approximately balance out to similar levels of opponents. It should be a pretty good measure. It's going to be biased against players that make it farther in tournaments, because the farther you make it, the harder average opposition you have. So it will make weaker players look closer to stronger players than they are. But okay, that's a whole nother thing. The point here is to say 5 different tournaments where Tezuka played at a could win a championship level. There were other people also playing at that level. Specifically in Ultimisia, there were 3 players playing over 90%. I don't have the record of Midas beating Tezuka. So Tezuka here is second to Seto, who incidentally played a perfect tournament. One of, I believe, 2 perfect tournaments that we have records of. Um, but and Seto's was the one that involved more games he had to play perfect in and harder opposition. So Seto's Ultimisia is the single most accurate tournament we have on record by like a clear margin. Now, Tezuka, because he lost to Midas in a game we don't have records of, his accuracy is certainly lower than this. And Midas's is very high. I believe Tezuka's would still be a little higher than Midas's. I believe if we include the loss, Tezuka drops to like 94, and Midas goes up from 90 to like 93, and Tezuka still snags second. Obviously, you can, and probably should, because he got second place, argue Midas had the second best tournament in Ultimisia. But the point is still, Tezuka had an insanely good tournament. And we'll actually see more about how good his Ultimisia tournament was in a moment. But 5 tournaments where he was absolutely top tier. And again, you can see 100% of his losses come to that quartet plus Midas. The 5 players getting in his way. But without those 5, undefeated in the site's return. Pretty remarkable. And just very high level of play in most tournaments. Yeah. We also have the longest, I looked at the longest streaks of flawless games, meaning perfectly accurate games. And Tezuka has a 10-game streak and a separate 5-game streak. And if we look at those other 6 players, those 5 players plus Akiyama, because obviously Akiyama is also excellent, and we look at their longest streaks, there was only one player who has a longer streak than Tezuka's 10-game streak, and that's Seto with 12 in Ultimisia, where Seto played the best tournament we have records of. So, yeah, just insanely high run of quality play by Tezuka. And you can see his opponents during the run. 3 games against Akiyama, 2 against Blizzard. I think Blizzard played really well that match. 3 against Yevon, and 2 against Seto. That's a pretty good 10-game streak. Those are 10 players where it's very hard to play absolutely perfectly. In Triad Wars 16, he has a 5-game streak against Delial. He ends up losing that matchup, but that's really strong too. It's also hard to play flawlessly for 5 games against Delial. So yeah, I think this is a cool way to show how strong Tezuka is when he is at his best, is no mistakes for really long durations of time against really top tier opposition. So then I wanted to show a couple moments of his, and I specifically wanted to grab them from his TTAC 14 run. So this is from the semifinals. Chickeny starts with 7, 4, 2, 7, and 9, which Tezuka can take one way with 6, 7, 4, 2, and 8, but cannot take in 6. And I always love adjacent corners attacking the weak side. So he plays this adjacent corner in 3, setting himself up in 6. He now attacks from both directions. Importantly, he also has more high-level power left in his hand. Chickeny has used his level 5. Chickeny is a phenomenal player, very accurate as well, who I think his kind of one weakness is he often gets himself in trouble with starters and then plays really well to get himself out of it. But this is like almost winning on the spot. Chickeny has like 2 ways to tie, and they are not easy to find. Chickeny ended up finding the right square, but not quite the right card, though he had the right idea, which is always really tough. He finds a move in 5, which is where there's a tie, but he ends up not picking the right card. But this is sort of an example, and I think there's a bunch of these, of Tezuka winning a game very, very early, and then cleaning it out well. Just safely bringing home the win. I somehow don't have video or image of the TTAC 14 finals, but I can tell you what happened. Tezuka starts with A3, 6, 8, and 1, right? The weakest of weak corners. He has a Dia, which can same wallet from 2. He has recaptures, but his hand is built to start with a weak corner. A specific weak corner, not a, well, my plan stuff didn't really work out, so I'm chucking that there, or nothing's lining up, so I'll play a weak corner. Instead, or this is a game with its very split level, right? Where you throw one of your weak cards in a corner so that your stronger cards can sweep later. Now, this was a level 10 game, so there weren't weak cards. And he starts with this planned weak corner. And one of the things I think is most telling about it, and one of the things that's most remarkable, is both Deli and I think it was 7876, I didn't check, but some utility card like that. Both of our first instincts, I asked Deli after thinking, well, I would play this. I asked Deli what his like top three moves were, and it was the first he listed. This was way back when this happened. We both listed this move in a far corner, and it's losing by force. As I've said in the past, I think if there's one game I wish I understood perfectly in TTA tournament history that I've seen, it's kind of this one, because I don't really get how Tezuka got so much pressure off a weak corner starter, and not like long-term pressure where suddenly the opponent has very few ties a couple moves down the road. Immediate pressure. Really remarkable. Um, I think Seto has a lot of magic in his weak corner plays, and I think Tezuka, if there's any player that shares that kind of magic, it's Tezuka. And it tends to be Tezuka in a different way than it is for Seto. I think Tezuka plans his games and structures his hands. He's won multiple Handmaker of the Year awards. His thinking in advance is really powerful and really thoughtful ways of organizing cards together. And there was some metric I made a while ago that I've lost the spreadsheet of, but that tried to measure like who gets advantages when in the game. And especially, not actually as much on turn one, but on turns two and three, it starts to become really clear in terms of how many ties the opponent has left and how many moves lose for them. That Tezuka is creating the most advantage around move 2-3 of anyone. I think if we're going to say a weakness of Tezuka, and I think it is a weakness, I do not think he has the calculation of some of the greats. Um, the greats basically don't make any mistakes on move 7. He has a tournament mistake on move 7 on the record. They don't make as many mistakes on move 6 or move 5. But his early game, his instincts, his understanding, his hand building, his creativity, um, and really that sort of response to the starter or follow up to a starter, depending on if he's on first or second turn, is absolutely elite. So how good was peak Tezuka? Basically, he was only beaten by the very best players around. I think it's fitting that in 2006's Triad Wars, he was beaten by Seto, and in 2024 in Ultimisia, where, Tezuka won TTAC 14, so that's kind of got to be the peak. But by a bunch of metrics, Ultimisia is where he was actually playing his best. It was Seto again, you know, if not for Seto and Midas. Midas is pretty important here. He's one of the most accurate players around. His streak of accurate games is off the charts. Aside, again, Seto. Damn you, Seto. And his early game play is really superb. Um, so in 06 to 07, I think would probably put him between 6th and 15th in the world. There's a lot of very good players hanging around or just starting, and how he stacks up against them is not exactly clear. By sort of win percentage over his optimal run, he's, I think, around 8th during that run. But other players have some good results right before and after, so it seems a little rude to cut them off. But also, they're all very close. You could easily put him a little higher. So I think he starts and is immediately one of the best players around. And the site was much more active then, I think the top end of the site is really, really strong right now. But there are 25, 30 players running around then that you'd say are excellent players. And it is harder to sustain those numbers now when we don't really have 25, 30 players. So I think that's, an incredibly impressive start. As I said, he might have the best start of any player ever. And in the modern era, he's one of only 5 open champions. There's only 5 players that have won an open championship, and I think very deservedly he is one of them. My all-time rankings currently have him 20th. I think there's a range you could put him in that's quite reasonable. But I also don't know how many of the top 25 I would take versus Tezuka at his very best. Because I think Tezuka at his very best is doing something really interesting, really different, and really strong. I guess that's all I got. Is there anything more for me to babble on about with Tezuka? No, I just think he's a really cool player. I really enjoy when I get to see him play. I think he finds really different ideas. I remember this was watching some interview with a Tetris player. And they were like, "Who do you enjoy watching?" And the person was like, "Well, I think a lot of the top players stack pretty similarly. So I like watching Pixel Andy because I think he plays differently than my intuition. So he's the player I can watch and learn from." Now, there are a lot of players. One thing about Triple Triad is there are many different ways to play well, and a lot of the top players are really different in their intuitions. Um, so it's not unique that Tezuka is someone I think watching shows me things I don't understand, but he is certainly one of the players that does that. And yeah, just a really cool player. And shout out to Tezuka.